Commander adjusted her breathing apparatus as she stepped off the transport shuttle onto the pristine landing platform of the Galactic Trade Station Nexus 7. The artificial gravity here was set to the standard 0.6 G that most civilized species found comfortable. Her four legs moved with practiced ease across the polished metal surface, her crystalline carapace catching the artificial sunlight streaming through the massive viewport that dominated the station's central hub. Today marked a historic occasion. For the first time in galactic history, representatives from Terra, that backwater death world on the outer rim, would be joining the Galactic Commerce Guild. The very thought made her mandibles click in amusement. Humans, they called themselves. Such an odd name for such an odd species. The briefing documents she'd received painted a rather grim picture of there. Terra, or Earth as the natives called it, was a Class 12 hostile environment world with crushing gravity nearly twice the galactic standard. The planet was covered in toxic oxygen, had unstable tectonic plates that constantly shifted and caused devastating earthquakes, and weather patterns so violent they could level entire cities. The oceans were deep enough to crush most spacecraft, and the atmospheric pressure at sea level with the bodily fluids of most sentient beings. Yet somehow, impossibly, intelligent life had evolved there. Not just survived, but thrived to the point of achieving faster-than-light travel and requesting membership in the guild. It was either an incredible testament to the stubborn persistence of evolution, or evidence that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. His colleagues had been gossiping about the humans for weeks leading up to this meeting. The general consensus among the trade representatives was a mixture of morbid curiosity and barely concealed condescension. How could any species that evolved in such harsh conditions possibly have anything valuable to contribute to galactic commerce? Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, their ships were clunky and inefficient, and their understanding of economics was rudimentary at best. The ambassador, a tall, ethereal being whose species had evolved on a low-gravity moon with perfectly controlled atmospheric conditions, had been particularly dismissive. "Mark my words," he had said during the pre-meeting briefing. "These humans will be nothing more than a novelty. Perhaps we can use them as heavy labor on high-gravity worlds where our machinery breaks down. Beyond that, they're utterly useless." The sentiment was echoed by most of the other representatives. The delegate, whose bird-like species had evolved in the gaseous outer layers of a gas giant, had laughed so hard at the human gravity measurements that she'd nearly molted her feathers. 2.4 times standard gravity? She'd chirped incredulously. How do they even move? They must crawl everywhere like slugs. Even the normally diplomatic representative, whose species prided itself on finding common ground with anyone, had expressed private doubts about the humans' ability to contribute meaningfully to galactic society. "I'm sure they're lovely beings in their own way," she had said with that patronizing tone they used when discussing lesser species. "But really, what could a species that's barely left their own solar system possibly offer us? We'll welcome them, of course. It's only polite, but let's not pretend this is anything more than a charitable gesture." Had to admit she shared many of these sentiments, though she was too professional to voice them as bluntly as some of her colleagues. Her species had built their reputation on careful analysis and strategic thinking. They didn't mock other species openly, but they certainly weren't above judging them privately. And by every metric that mattered in galactic commerce, technological advancement, economic sophistication, military capability, cultural refinement, the humans scored poorly. Their ships were massive, blocky things that looked like flying bricks compared to the elegant, streamlined vessels of more advanced civilizations. Their weapons were primitive projectile systems that relied on chemical explosives rather than the refined energy weapons that civilized species preferred. Their economic system was a chaotic mess of competing nation-states with different currencies, trade policies, and legal frameworks. They couldn't even agree on basic units of measurement. Some used metric, others used something called imperial, and apparently they fought wars over these kinds of differences. But perhaps most telling of all was their complete inability to adapt to standard galactic environmental conditions. Every other species that had joined the guild had been able to modify themselves or their equipment to function in the standard 0.6 G, low oxygen, temperature-controlled environments that made commerce possible. The humans, apparently, couldn't even breathe the standard atmosphere without bulky life support systems. They were like walking environmental hazards. As made her way through the station's bustling commercial district, she noticed the other species giving her a wide berth. Word had spread that the human delegation was arriving today, and everyone was curious to see what these gravity-bound primitives looked like. Street vendors hawked betting pools on whether the humans would be able to walk upright in the station's reduced gravity, or if they would bounce around like children's toys. The odds were heavily favored toward the latter. The meeting hall where the formal introduction would take place was located in the station's diplomatic sector, a gleaming complex of conference rooms and ceremonial chambers designed to accommodate the needs of hundreds of different species. As entered the main assembly hall, she was struck by how crowded it was. Apparently, half the station had decided to attend what was being billed as a historic first contact. The atmosphere was festive, almost carnival-like, with beings from dozens of worlds chattering excitedly in their various languages. At the center of the hall was a raised platform where the human delegation would be formally introduced to the guild assembly. The platform had been specially modified for the occasion, with reinforced flooring to handle the humans' supposedly enormous weight and emergency medical stations, positioned nearby, in case the gravity differential caused them to collapse. The whole setup looked more like preparation for a dangerous zoo exhibition than a diplomatic meeting. Ambassador, the guild's senior representative and a member of the ancient species, called the assembly to order with a series of harmonic tones that resonated through the hall's acoustic systems. The crowd gradually quieted as all attention focused on the main entrance, where the human delegation would make their appearance. "Distinguished colleagues," began, his melodious voice carrying easily through the hall, "today we witness a remarkable moment in galactic history. For the first time, we welcome a species from a Class 12 hostile environment world into our commercial fellowship. The humans of Terra have achieved faster-than-light travel despite evolving under conditions that would be lethal to most of us. Whatever we may think of their technological limitations or cultural peculiarities, we must acknowledge their extraordinary determination in reaching this point." The ambassador's words were diplomatic, but could hear the underlying skepticism. Even, renowned for his ability to find positive things to say about anyone, was struggling to put a favorable spin on humanity's prospects. "The human delegation consists of 5 representatives," continued. "They have requested accommodation for their unique environmental needs, and we have, of course, been happy to provide appropriate facilities. I understand they will be wearing environmental suits to help them adapt to our standard atmospheric conditions." This announcement prompted a fresh wave of chittering and clicking from the assembled crowd. Environmental suits for a diplomatic meeting? It was almost unheard of. Most species made at least some effort to adapt to standard conditions for formal occasions. The fact that humans couldn't even do that much seemed to confirm everyone's worst assumptions about their primitive nature. The main entrance doors, massive slabs of reinforced titanium ceramic composite designed to handle the atmospheric pressure differentials of dozens of different species, began to slide open with a deep, resonant hum. The crowd's chatter died away instantly as everyone craned their necks, stalks, or sensory organs to get their first glimpse of the mysterious humans. What emerged from the doorway was not at all what anyone had expected. The first figure through the entrance was clearly wearing some kind of environmental suit, but it was unlike anything the assembled diplomats had seen before. Instead of the bulky, clunky life support systems they had imagined, the human wore a sleek, form-fitting outfit that seemed to move with fluid grace. The suit was a deep blue color with subtle technological details worked into the fabric in silver thread. Most surprisingly, the human's face was completely visible through a transparent faceplate that seemed impossibly thin and delicate. But it wasn't the suit that caught everyone's attention. It was how the human moved. In the reduced gravity of the station, most species became lighter, more buoyant, their movements taking on an almost dance-like quality as they adapted to weighing less than normal. The assembled diplomats had expected the humans to become bouncing, uncontrolled projectiles, flailing helplessly as they tried to adjust to weighing less than half of their normal body weight. Instead, the human moved with absolute precision and control. Each step was deliberate and measured, their center of gravity perfectly balanced despite the reduced gravitational field. They didn't bounce or stumble or struggle to control their momentum. If anything, they seemed to move with even more grace and fluidity than they would have under normal conditions. The lead human, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with dark skin and intelligent eyes, approached the central platform with confident strides. Their movement was so controlled, so precise, that it took a moment for the significance to sink in. This wasn't someone struggling to adapt to unfamiliar conditions. This was someone who had mastered their environment so completely that they could function perfectly under any gravitational conditions. Behind the lead figure came 4 more humans, each moving with the same impossible grace and control. They formed a loose formation as they walked, not the tight, defensive cluster that most species adopted when entering unfamiliar territory, but the confident spacing of beings who were completely comfortable in their surroundings. The crowd's excited chatter had died away completely, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. This wasn't what anyone had expected. Where were the clumsy, gravity-bound primitives they had been prepared to mock? Where were the bulky environmental suits and the stumbling, helpless movements? These beings moved like apex predators, completely in control of their environment despite being in conditions that should have been completely alien to them. Felt her mandibles click nervously as she watched the humans approach the platform. Something was very wrong with the picture everyone had painted of these beings. They had been described as primitive, clumsy, technologically backward. But the 5 figures now climbing onto the central platform with fluid, controlled movements looked like anything but primitives. The lead human reached the center of the platform and turned to address the assembly. When they spoke, their voice carried clearly through the hall's audio systems without any apparent technological amplification. This was another surprise. Most species required translation devices or vocal amplifiers to communicate effectively in the mixed atmosphere of the station. "Honored representatives of the Galactic Commerce Guild," the human said, their voice carrying a strange undertone that made Carapace tingle. "I am Captain Sarah of the Terran Federation. My colleagues and I are grateful for this opportunity to address your assembly and formally request membership in your organization." The human's words were perfectly pronounced in standard Galactic, with only the faintest trace of an accent that none of the assembled linguists could immediately identify. This was yet another surprise. Learning to speak Galactic properly usually took newly contacted species years of study, yet these humans seemed to have mastered it completely. "We come before you today not as supplicants seeking charity," continued, "but as equals offering mutually beneficial partnership. We understand that many of you have preconceptions about our species based on the environmental conditions of our. We're here to demonstrate that these preconceptions may be somewhat inaccurate." There was something in the human's tone, a subtle confidence that bordered on amusement, that made several members of the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats, pods, or perches. This wasn't the submissive gratitude they had expected from a primitive species being granted membership in their exclusive club. Captain gestured to one of her companions, a shorter human with red hair and pale skin who stepped forward carrying what appeared to be a simple metal briefcase. "Before we begin formal negotiations," said, "we thought you might be interested in a small demonstration of human capabilities. We understand that many of you have expressed doubts about our ability to contribute meaningfully to galactic commerce due to our unique evolutionary background." The red-haired human, introduced as Doctor, according to the scrolling text on the hall's information displays, placed the briefcase on a table that had been provided for the human delegation. The table, noticed, had been reinforced with extra supports to handle the supposedly massive weight of human equipment. Doctor opened the briefcase with casual ease, revealing what appeared to be an empty interior lined with some kind of metallic fabric. "This is a standard Terran engineering toolkit," Doctor explained, his voice carrying the same unsettling confidence as his captain's. "It contains everything a human technician might need for basic repairs and modifications in a standard spacefaring environment." He reached into the apparently empty briefcase and began pulling out tools. Not just a few tools, dozens of them. Precision instruments, cutting devices, measuring equipment, microfabrication units, and several devices that none of the assembled engineers could immediately identify. The tools seemed to unfold and expand as they were removed from the briefcase, transforming from compact, nested shapes into full-sized, functional equipment. The crowd watched in growing amazement as Doctor continued to unpack the briefcase. The volume of equipment he was removing far exceeded the physical capacity of the container, yet he kept pulling out more tools, each more sophisticated than the last. Finally, after several minutes of unpacking, he reached the bottom of the briefcase and closed it with a satisfied smile. "Human engineering," Captain explained to the stunned audience, "has been focused on efficiency and adaptability. When you evolve on a world where every gram of weight matters, where every cubic centimeter of space is precious, you learn to make things that do more with less. This toolkit weighs less than 5 kilograms and occupies a volume of approximately 30 liters, yet it contains over 200 individual tools and can fabricate thousands more using its built-in molecular assemblers. The implications of what they were seeing began to dawn on the assembled delegates. This wasn't primitive technology. This was engineering so advanced that it made their own equipment look bulky and inefficient by comparison. The humans had achieved in a single briefcase what most species required entire workshops to accomplish. But the demonstration was far from over. Captain gestured to another member of her delegation, a muscular human with dark hair who had been standing quietly to one side. "Lieutenant," she said, "would you mind giving our hosts a demonstration of human physical capabilities?" Lieutenant nodded and stepped forward. He was carrying what appeared to be a standard piece of station equipment, a gravity manipulation unit used for moving heavy cargo around the docking bays. The unit was designed to handle loads up to 10 times standard gravity and normally required a team of technicians and specialized equipment to operate safely. Picked up the unit with one hand. The crowd's stunned silence deepened as the human began manipulating the gravity device as if it weighed nothing. He adjusted the settings with casual precision, creating localized gravity fields that made small objects dance in the air around him. With his free hand, he juggled several pieces of station debris that had been scattered around the platform, keeping them in perfect formation using minute adjustments to the gravity field. "Humans," Captain explained conversationally as her subordinate continued his impossible display, "have evolved under gravitational conditions that require extraordinary physical strength and coordination. What you consider to be heavy machinery, we consider to be standard hand tools. What you consider to be precise, delicate work requiring specialized equipment, we can accomplish with our bare hands." Set down the gravity manipulator and picked up one of the tools Doctor had unpacked from the briefcase, a precision cutting device designed for microsurgery on spacecraft components. Using only his hands to steady the device, he began cutting intricate patterns in the air, the cutting beam creating complex three-dimensional geometric shapes with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. The assembled engineers and technicians watched in growing horror as the human performed feats of precision that their own species required computer-controlled machinery to accomplish. The steady hands, the perfect eye-hand coordination, the absolute control over fine motor movements. It was like watching a living machine perform tasks that pushed the boundaries of what biological beings should be capable of. Doctor stepped forward again, this time carrying a data pad displaying what appeared to be a complex engineering schematic. "While Lieutenant demonstrates human physical capabilities," he said, "perhaps you'd be interested in seeing some examples of human problem-solving techniques." The schematic he displayed showed the design for a new type of fusion reactor, one that was smaller, more efficient, and significantly more powerful than anything in current use throughout the galaxy. The design incorporated principles that the assembled scientists recognized, but had never seen combined in such an elegant, unified system. "This reactor design," Doctor explained, "was developed by a team of human engineers over the course of 6 months. It produces 4 times the energy output of comparable galactic designs while using half the fuel and requiring minimal maintenance. We've built 3 working prototypes and are prepared to share the technology as part of our contribution to the Guild." The crowd erupted in excited chatter as the implications sank in. Energy production was one of the fundamental challenges of galactic civilization. More efficient fusion reactors could revolutionize space travel, planetary development, and industrial production across hundreds of worlds. If the humans were offering to share such advanced technology freely, it suggested that they had even more impressive innovations they weren't showing yet. Captain allowed the crowd to buzz with excitement for a few moments before raising her hand for silence. "Of course," she said with that same subtle smile, "this is just one small example of human engineering. We've brought similar innovations in propulsion technology, materials science, biotechnology, and several other fields. We're eager to share our knowledge with our new partners in the Guild." The word partners hung in the air with unmistakable emphasis. This wasn't a primitive species begging for acceptance. This was a highly advanced civilization offering to share revolutionary technology with beings they considered equals. The entire dynamic of the meeting had shifted in the space of a few minutes. Felt her carefully constructed assumptions crumbling as she watched the human delegation. Everything they had been told about these beings was either wrong or deliberately misleading. These weren't clumsy, gravity-bound primitives struggling to adapt to civilized conditions. They were apex predators who had turned their hostile environment into an advantage, developing capabilities that made them superior to their supposed betters in almost every measurable way. The laughter and mockery that had filled the pre-meeting briefings suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but dangerous. If the humans were capable of this level of technological sophistication while appearing to be primitive, what else were they capable of? What other assumptions about them were catastrophically wrong? As Captain prepared to continue her presentation, found herself wondering if the Galactic Commerce Guild was really welcoming a new member, or if they were about to discover that they were the primitive ones. The tension in the assembly hall was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade as Captain gestured to the final member of her delegation. The being who stepped forward was different from the others, taller, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the massive chamber in a single glance. When she moved, there was something predatory about her gait that made several of the more perceptive species representatives unconsciously lean back in their seats. "Dr. Captain announced, our and cultural liaison specialist. She spent the last several years studying galactic civilization and has some observations that might interest you." Doctor approached the central podium with the same fluid grace that all the humans had displayed, but there was something else in her movement, a controlled intensity that suggested coiled springs ready to release. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made the vast chamber fall completely silent. "During our journey to this station," Doctor began, "we had the opportunity to observe many examples of galactic technology, social structures, and economic systems. As scientists, we found these observations fascinating. As potential partners, we found them illuminating." She activated a holographic display that materialized above the central platform, showing detailed schematics of various spacecraft designs. The images rotated slowly, highlighting structural elements and technological components with surgical precision. "Your ships are beautiful," she continued, elegant, streamlined, clearly designed by species with sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities. However, from an engineering perspective, they share some interesting common characteristics. They're optimized for comfort rather than functionality. They prioritize style over durability. Most importantly, they're designed for controlled, predictable environments. The holographic display shifted to show stress analysis patterns overlaying the ship designs. Bright red zones appeared at multiple points on each vessel, indicating structural weaknesses and failure points. The pattern was consistent across every design, beautiful, sophisticated ships that would crumble under real stress. These vessels would perform admirably in the stable, controlled conditions that characterize most of galactic space, Doctor observed. However, they would fail catastrophically if exposed to the kind of environmental challenges that human ships encounter routinely. Variable gravity fields, radiation storms, asteroid impacts, extreme temperature fluctuations, the conditions that exist in the unexplored regions beyond your current borders. An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the crowd. The unexplored regions she mentioned were generally considered too dangerous for civilized species to venture into. Most galactic exploration was limited to stable systems with predictable conditions, leaving vast areas of space completely unmapped. "This isn't a criticism," Doctor clarified, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Your species have adapted to the environments available to you, comfortable worlds with stable gravity, controlled atmospheres, and predictable weather patterns. You've built a civilization that maximizes comfort and minimizes risk. It's a logical approach that has served you well." The holographic display shifted again, this time showing images of various species engaged in routine activities: commerce, transportation, manufacturing, research. The images were taken from public databases, standard promotional materials that each species used to showcase their capabilities. "However," Doctor continued, "this optimization for comfort has created some interesting limitations. Your manufacturing processes, for example, require precise environmental controls and stable gravitational conditions. Your transportation networks are vulnerable to disruption by natural phenomena. Your exploration capabilities are restricted to regions where you can maintain the controlled conditions your technology requires. She gestured, and the display zoomed in on specific examples. A manufacturing facility that had shut down completely when a solar flare disrupted the local electromagnetic field. A transport convoy that had been stranded for weeks when a gravitational anomaly knocked their navigation systems offline. A research station that had been abandoned after a series of minor seismic events made the planetary surface uninhabitable, despite the fact that the tremors would barely register as noticeable on Earth. Humans, Doctor said, evolved under conditions that would be considered catastrophically hostile by galactic standards. Our regularly experiences gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic storms, seismic events, atmospheric disruptions, and temperature variations that would shut down most galactic infrastructure. We didn't just adapt to these conditions, we learned to thrive in them. The holographic display shifted to show images of human technology in action, but these weren't the elegant demonstrations they had seen earlier. These were recordings of human ships and equipment operating in conditions that made the assembled delegates gasp in horror. Vessels diving into the coronas of active stars to harvest exotic particles. Mining operations conducted in the crushing gravity wells of neutron stars. Research stations operating normally on planets where the atmospheric pressure would most known metals. What you consider to be impossible working conditions, Doctor explained, we consider to be normal occupational hazards. Your species avoid the unexplored regions because the environmental challenges make them uninhabitable. For humans, those same challenges make them interesting. Captain stepped forward again, her expression serious. Doctor's observations bring us to the real reason for today's meeting. Yes, we're interested in joining the Galactic Commerce Guild. Yes, we're prepared to share our technology and contribute to the galactic economy. But we're not here because we need your civilization, we're here because you need ours. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. The comfortable assumption that the Guild was doing the humans a favor by accepting them had just been turned completely upside down. The humans weren't supplicants seeking membership in a superior civilization. They were offering to solve problems that the existing galactic powers didn't even realize they had. Ambassador, who had been listening to the human presentation with growing unease, finally found his voice. That's a rather bold claim, Captain. Perhaps you could elaborate on what you think we need from your species. Captain's smile was entirely too predatory for comfort. Certainly, Ambassador. Let me start with a simple question. When was the last time any galactic power successfully explored beyond the established trade routes? The question hit the assembly like a physical blow. It was well known that galactic exploration had essentially stagnated for centuries. The known regions of space had been thoroughly mapped and exploited, but venturing beyond them was considered too risky for civilized species. The unexplored regions were written off as inherently hostile to intelligent life. The answer, Captain continued, is approximately 400 years ago, when the Deep Space Initiative was abandoned after losing 17 ships to unexplainable phenomena in what you now call the Forbidden Zones. Since then, galactic civilization has been essentially trapped within the boundaries of known space, unable to expand further because the frontier conditions are too dangerous for your technology to handle. Doctor activated another holographic display, this one showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. The explored regions, the areas where galactic civilization existed, appeared as small bubbles of light in a vast ocean of darkness. It was a sobering visual representation of how little of the galaxy had actually been explored. Humans have been operating in conditions equivalent to your forbidden zones since we achieved space flight, Doctor explained. What you call impossibly hostile, we call Tuesday. In the 18 months since we achieved faster-than-light travel, we've explored more new systems than the entire Galactic Guild has discovered in the past century. The holographic map began filling in with new points of light, showing the systems that human explorers had mapped during their brief time in space. The rate of discovery was staggering. In less than 2 years, humans had expanded the known regions of the galaxy by nearly 20%. But that's not the most significant discovery we've made, Captain said, her voice taking on a tone that made several species representatives shift nervously in their seats. Tell them about the artifacts, Doctor. The holographic display shifted to show images of clearly artificial structures found in the previously unexplored regions of space, massive constructions that dwarfed anything built by known galactic civilizations. The structures were ancient, obviously the products of a technology far more advanced than anything currently available, and they were scattered throughout the forbidden zones that galactic powers had been afraid to enter. We've discovered evidence of at least 3 distinct precursor civilizations operating in the unexplored regions, Doctor reported. Their technology appears to be several orders of magnitude more advanced than current galactic standards. They built structures that manipulate space-time itself, power sources that tap directly into stellar cores, and transportation networks that allow instantaneous travel between star systems. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a cascade of falling dominoes. Advanced precursor technology had been the stuff of legends and theoretical speculation for the discovery that it actually existed and was sitting unclaimed in the regions that galactic civilization was too frightened to explore represented opportunities beyond calculation. Of course, Captain added with that same predatory smile, these artifacts are located in environments where standard galactic technology simply cannot operate. The gravitational distortions, radiation levels, and spatial anomalies that surround these sites would destroy conventional ships before they could get close enough to conduct meaningful research. Lieutenant stepped forward, carrying a device that none of the assembled scientists could immediately identify. "This is a scanner reading taken from the core of the largest artifact site we've discovered," he announced. "The facility appears to be some kind of manufacturing complex capable of assembling matter at the subatomic level. Based on our preliminary analysis, it could potentially build anything, starships, planets, even artificial life forms, from basic atomic components." The device projected a holographic representation of the scanning data, showing energy patterns and structural designs that pushed the boundaries of theoretical physics. Several of the assembled scientists audibly gasped as they recognized the implications of what they were seeing. "Unfortunately," Lieutenant continued, "the facility is located at the bottom of a gravity well approximately 50 times galactic standard, surrounded by radiation levels that would cook most known life forms in seconds, in a region of space where normal physics appear to operate according to modified rules. Standard galactic technology would be destroyed long before it could get close enough to conduct meaningful research. Human technology, however," Captain interjected, "is specifically designed to operate under such conditions. We've already conducted 3 successful research expeditions to the facility and have begun preliminary analysis of its capabilities. We estimate that full understanding of its technology could advance galactic civilization by thousands of years, assuming, of course, that someone can actually reach it to conduct proper research." The message was clear without being stated explicitly. The humans had discovered the greatest treasure in the galaxy, sitting in locations that only they had the capability to reach. The galactic powers who had dismissed them as primitive now found themselves in the position of needing human assistance to access technology that could revolutionize their civilizations. Commander felt her carefully structured worldview crumbling as she processed the implications of what she was hearing. The humans weren't just more advanced than they had appeared. They had access to resources and knowledge that made them potentially the most powerful force in the galaxy. And they had been polite enough to ask for permission to join the Commerce Guild rather than simply taking whatever they wanted. The ambassador, who had been so dismissive of human capabilities during the pre-meeting briefings, finally found his voice. This is quite extraordinary," he managed to say, his usual aristocratic composure completely shattered. "If what you're telling us is accurate, then these discoveries could benefit all of galactic civilization immeasurably." Captain nodded graciously. "That's our hope, Ambassador. But as you can imagine, research expeditions to these sites require enormous resources and extremely specialized equipment. We're not in a position to conduct this research alone, nor would we want to. This kind of knowledge belongs to all intelligent species, not just to humans." Doctor stepped forward again. "However, organizing joint research expeditions will require unprecedented levels of cooperation and resource sharing. The environmental challenges alone mean that most galactic technology would need to be completely redesigned to function in these regions. It will require the combined efforts of multiple species, sharing their best knowledge and most advanced capabilities. In other words," Captain concluded, "it will require exactly the kind of cooperative framework that the Galactic Commerce Guild was designed to provide." If we're going to unlock these secrets together, we'll need to function as true partners, not as a dominant civilization graciously accepting primitive supplicants. The transformation in the assembly hall was remarkable. Less than an hour ago, the gathered representatives had been preparing to welcome primitive humans as a charity case. Now they were looking at the human delegation as the key to the greatest discoveries in galactic history. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that several delegates were already making notes about how to restructure their trade agreements to ensure continued access to human cooperation. Ambassador, his ancient diplomatic instincts finally catching up with the new reality, stepped forward with a formal bow that conveyed genuine respect rather than condescending politeness. "Captain, Doctor, honored members of the human delegation," he said, "it appears that we have significantly underestimated both your capabilities and the value of your potential contribution to our guild. Perhaps we should begin discussions about how best to structure a true partnership between our civilizations." Captain's smile was warmer now, less predatory and more genuinely friendly. "We'd be delighted to discuss partnership terms, Ambassador. But before we begin formal negotiations, there's one more thing you should probably know about human capabilities." She gestured to Doctor, who had been quietly packing up his engineering demonstration. "Would you mind showing our hosts the real reason we requested membership in the Commerce Guild?" Doctor nodded and reached into his toolkit, pulling out a device that looked deceptively simple. A small, handheld unit with a single control surface and a modest display screen. He activated it with a casual gesture, and the air above the central platform began to shimmer. Slowly, impossibly, a structure began to materialize in the space above their heads. It started as a wireframe outline, then filled in with solid matter as the device continued its work. Within minutes, a perfect scale model of the space station they were standing in had been constructed from apparently empty air, complete down to the smallest architectural details. "Portable matter compiler," Doctor explained conversationally as the assembled delegates stared in shock at the impossible device. "Standard human emergency equipment. It can fabricate pretty much anything we need using local atomic materials. This particular model has enough power to build a full-sized spacecraft if necessary." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just brought advanced technology, they had brought manufacturing capabilities that could revolutionize galactic industry overnight. The ability to build anything, anywhere, using only local materials would eliminate most of the logistical challenges that limited galactic expansion. Captain watched the effect of this final revelation on the assembled crowd, then smiled that predatory smile one more time. "As I said, Ambassador, we're not here because we need your civilization, but we think that together we can accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. The question is, are you ready to be genuine partners with a species that evolved under conditions you consider impossible?" The challenge was clear, and so was the choice facing the Galactic Commerce Guild. They could accept the humans as equals and gain access to revolutionary technology and discoveries that could advance their civilizations by. Or they could continue to treat them as primitives and find themselves left behind as human civilization surged ahead into regions of space they were too afraid to explore. Looking around the assembly hall at the faces of her fellow delegates, Commander could see that the choice had already been made. The age of galactic civilization looking down on the humans was over. The age of galactic civilization trying to keep up with them was just beginning. 3 months after the historic meeting at Nexus 7, Commander found herself aboard the human vessel Endurance, trying not to think about the fact that she was currently traveling through a region of space that would have been instantly fatal to any ship in the galactic fleet. Through the reinforced viewport of her specially modified observation chamber, she watched in fascination as Lieutenant casually adjusted the ship's course to avoid a gravity well that would have torn a conventional vessel apart. The joint expedition to Artifact Site Omega had been the inevitable result of the humans' revelation 3 months ago. Within days of Captain's presentation, every major power in the galactic community had submitted formal requests for partnership agreements with the Terran Federation. The negotiations had been complex, but the final result was unprecedented in galactic history. A truly cooperative research effort involving 12 different species, all working as equal partners under human logistical leadership. The Endurance itself was a testament to human engineering philosophy. Unlike the elegant, streamlined vessels of galactic civilization, it looked like exactly what it was: a ship designed to survive anything the universe could throw at it. The hull was thick and angular, studded with sensor arrays and defensive systems that could handle everything from asteroid impacts to stellar radiation. The interior was surprisingly spacious, but every surface showed the signs of practical design over aesthetic considerations. "How are you adjusting to the gravity, Commander?" Doctor asked as she entered the observation chamber. The human moved with her characteristic fluid grace even in the ship's 1.2G artificial gravity field, a compromise between human comfort and what the alien crew members could tolerate. "Better than I expected," replied, though the honest answer would have been that every movement felt like she was carrying an additional crew member on her back. The humans had offered to reduce the gravity further, but she had insisted on adapting to their standard conditions. If she was going to understand these beings, she needed to experience the world from their perspective. "The gravity isn't the most impressive adaptation you've made," Doctor observed with a slight smile. "3 months ago, you thought humans were primitive. Now you're trusting your life to human technology in one of the most dangerous regions of known space." His mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as rueful amusement. "3 months ago, I thought I understood the universe. I've learned that intellectual humility is a valuable survival trait when dealing with species that consider neutron star mining to be routine." Through the viewport, the destination of their expedition was becoming visible. Artifact Site Omega hung in space like a crystalline flower, its impossible architecture defying every law of physics that galactic science thought it understood. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but it seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, creating visual distortions that made it difficult to focus on directly. "First time seeing one of the artifacts in person?" Doctor asked, Nodding's expression of awe. "The recordings didn't do it justice," admitted. "How is it possible for something that large to maintain structural integrity without any visible support framework?" "That's one of the questions we're here to answer," Doctor replied. "Our preliminary analysis suggests that the artifacts use some kind of controlled space-time distortion to maintain their structure. The gravity fields around them aren't just environmental hazards, they're actually part of the construction technique." The observation chamber's door opened again, admitting Captain and 2 other expedition members: Doctor, a physicist and engineer, a materials scientist. Both aliens were wearing modified environmental suits that allowed them to function in the ship's high-gravity environment, though their movements were clearly labored. "Status report from the advance team," Captain announced. "They've successfully established a research station on the artifact's outer ring and begun preliminary analysis of the power distribution systems. The good news is that the structure appears to be completely automated, no sign of active security systems or defensive measures. The bad news is that the technology is so advanced that our instruments can barely detect how it works, let alone understand it." Doctor, despite his obvious discomfort with the gravity, managed to activate a holographic display showing the advanced team's findings. "The energy signatures we're detecting don't match any known physics," he reported, his melodic voice strained by the effort of moving in the increased gravity. "The power source appears to be drawing energy directly from the fabric of space-time itself, converting vacuum fluctuations into usable power with 100% efficiency." "Impossible," Engineer chirped, her avian vocal patterns making the universal translator work overtime to convey her meaning. "The thermodynamic laws alone would prevent such a system from functioning. There must be an external power source we haven't detected yet." Doctor shook her head. "That was our first assumption too, but 3 months of remote observation have confirmed it. The artifacts are genuinely self-powered using principles that our current understanding of physics says shouldn't work. Either the beings who built these structures discovered aspects of reality that we're completely ignorant of, or they found ways to manipulate the fundamental laws of the universe itself." The implications were staggering. If the artifact technology could be understood and replicated, it would provide unlimited clean energy for the entire galactic civilization. Faster-than-light travel could be revolutionized, planetary terraforming could be accomplished in decades rather than, and the resource limitations that had constrained galactic expansion for centuries could be eliminated entirely. "How close can we get to the primary structure?" Doctor asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his physical discomfort. Captain consulted a data pad displaying the expedition's operational parameters. The radiation levels and gravitational distortions around the central core are still beyond safe limits for most of our crew. However, Lieutenant believes he can get a small survey team to within 5 kilometers of the main power coupling systems using one of our heavy-duty exploration pods. "I volunteer for the survey team," said immediately, surprising herself with the words. 3 months ago, she wouldn't have trusted human technology to transport her across a space station. Now she was volunteering to ride in a human vehicle into one of the most dangerous environments in the galaxy. Doctor raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, Commander? The gravitational stress alone will be significant, and that's assuming the pod's inertial dampeners can compensate for the space-time distortions near the artifact's core. If we're going to understand this technology, someone needs to get close enough to take detailed readings," replied. "My species has the most advanced sensor technology in the galactic fleet. Besides, I want to see for myself what beings capable of building something like this were actually like." Captain nodded approvingly. "I appreciate the volunteer spirit, Commander, but you won't be going alone. This is too important for any single perspective to handle. We'll send a multi-species team with representatives from each of our major research disciplines." The next 6 hours were spent in preparation for what everyone understood could be either the most significant scientific expedition in galactic history or a catastrophic disaster that would claim some of the most brilliant minds in known space. The survey pod was a human design, naturally. No other species had vehicles capable of surviving the extreme conditions near the artifact's core. The pod itself was a masterpiece of engineering pragmatism. Where galactic vehicles prioritized comfort and aesthetic appeal, this craft was designed purely for survival. The hull was nearly a meter thick, composed of layered materials that could withstand gravitational stresses that would crush conventional spacecraft. The interior was cramped but functional, with every surface covered in monitoring equipment and emergency systems. Found herself seated between Doctor and a human geologist named Dr. Sarah, all three of them secured in restraint systems that looked more like medieval torture devices than standard safety equipment. Across from them sat engineer, doctor, and lieutenant, who would be piloting the pod manually since automated systems couldn't be trusted in the chaotic environment around the artifact. "Final systems check," announced as the pod separated from the Endurance and began its approach to the artifact's core. "All environmental systems are green, structural integrity is holding, and the inertial dampeners are operating within normal parameters. Estimated time to target zone is 43 minutes. The journey to the artifact's core was unlike anything the alien crew members had ever experienced. As they descended through the increasingly distorted spacetime around the ancient structure, the pod's sensors began detecting phenomena that challenged the basic assumptions of galactic physics. Gravity fields that shifted direction without warning, electromagnetic patterns that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, and energy signatures that appeared to violate conservation laws. "This is incredible," Doctor whispered as he watched his instruments register readings that should have been impossible. "The space-time curvature here is creating local regions where the speed of light appears to be variable. In some areas, it's actually faster than our universal constant. In others, it's so slow that photons are basically standing still." Doctor was equally fascinated by her geological readings. The matter composition of the artifact itself is beyond anything we've seen before. It's not just that the materials are unknown, the atomic structure seems to be fundamentally different. The electrons aren't orbiting the nuclei in conventional patterns. They're arranged in geometric configurations that shouldn't be stable. Engineer was studying the power distribution systems with growing amazement. The energy flow through this structure is completely impossible by conventional physics. Power is being transmitted through channels that don't correspond to any known electromagnetic phenomena. It's as if they found a way to move energy through dimensions that we can't even detect. Doctor was recording everything, her instruments capturing data that would keep busy for centuries. What's most interesting is that all of these impossible phenomena are perfectly controlled. This isn't chaotic or random. It's engineered with precision that makes our best technology look like stone tools. Whoever built this understood the universe at a level we can barely imagine. As they approached the core of the artifact, the view through the pod's reinforced viewports became increasingly surreal. The structure seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, its architecture shifting and changing as they moved closer. Geometric patterns that appeared solid from one angle became translucent from another. Surfaces that looked flat revealed themselves to be curved in directions that human geometry couldn't describe. Visual contact with primary power coupling systems, Lieutenant reported, his voice steady despite the fact that he was piloting through conditions that would have been instantly fatal to any other species. Beginning detailed scan sequence. What they discovered in those next few minutes would reshape galactic civilizations' understanding of what was possible. The artifact's power systems weren't just advanced. They were fundamentally based on principles that existing galactic science hadn't even theorized. The builders had discovered ways to manipulate the basic forces of the universe as easily as galactic engineers manipulated electricity. I'm reading power outputs that exceed the total energy production of our entire civilization, Doctor reported, his voice barely audible. Not just by a few orders of magnitude, by factors that I don't have words for. This single structure is producing more usable energy than every star in known space combined. The implications hit them all simultaneously. The beings who had built the artifacts hadn't just been more advanced than current galactic civilization. They had been so far beyond anything currently imaginable that the gap was almost incomprehensible. They had built structures that treated the fundamental laws of physics as engineering guidelines rather than absolute constraints. "There's something else," Doctor said, her voice carrying a note of excitement that made everyone turn to look at her instruments. "I'm detecting information storage systems throughout the structure, massive data banks that appear to contain, well, everything." "Everything?" Engineer asked. "Technical specifications, historical records, cultural databases, scientific research, the entire accumulated knowledge of the civilization that built this place. And it's all still accessible. After millions of years, the storage systems are still functional and the data is still intact." The silence in the pod was absolute as the implications sank in. They weren't just looking at advanced technology. They were looking at the complete knowledge base of a civilization that had solved problems galactic science didn't even know existed. If that information could be accessed and understood, it would advance galactic civilization not by thousands of years, but by millions. "Can we interface with the storage systems?" Captain's voice crackled over the communication link from the Endurance. Doctor was already working on the problem, her instruments probing the artifact's information systems with careful precision. "The data storage technology is unlike anything we've seen, but the structure seems designed to be accessible to other intelligent species. There are interface protocols that appear to be universal, mathematical concepts and physical constants that any advanced civilization would recognize." "It's almost like they wanted their knowledge to be found," observed. "As if they built these artifacts specifically to share their discoveries with species that would come after them." Doctor nodded thoughtfully. "That would explain why the artifacts are located in regions that would be dangerous to most species, but not impossible to reach. They're hidden in places that would challenge any civilization that found them, but not so well hidden that they could never be discovered." "A test," Lieutenant said quietly. "They put their knowledge where only species advanced enough to handle it could reach it, and they made sure that anyone who did reach it would have to work together to understand it." The realization sent chills through the entire survey team. The artifacts weren't just repositories of advanced technology. They were carefully designed challenges, left behind by a civilization that understood that knowledge without wisdom was dangerous. The environmental hazards, the impossible physics, the requirement for multiple species working together, it was all intentional. "Beginning data download," Doctor announced. "This is going to take some time to process, but I'm getting initial fragments of what appears to be an introduction or orientation file." The first pieces of information that came through the connection were simple mathematical proofs and physical demonstrations, universal concepts that would be recognizable to any intelligent species. But as the download progressed, the data became increasingly complex, building on itself in ways that suggested a carefully structured educational program. "They're teaching us," Doctor whispered as he watched the information flow past on his displays. "This isn't just raw data. It's a curriculum designed to bring less advanced civilizations up to their level of understanding." What they discovered over the next several hours would change everything. The artifact builders, who called themselves the architects in the translated text, had indeed been far beyond anything current galactic civilization could imagine. But more importantly, they had faced many of the same challenges that galactic civilization was facing now, and they had left behind detailed instructions for overcoming those challenges. Energy production, faster-than-light travel, planetary engineering, biological enhancement, artificial intelligence, dimensional physics. Every major field of scientific inquiry was represented in the artifact's databases, along with practical applications that could be implemented using current galactic technology as a starting point. But perhaps most significantly, the architects had left behind a clear explanation of why they had built the artifacts and what they expected future civilizations to do with the knowledge. The universe, according to the architects, was facing a fundamental crisis that would affect every intelligent species eventually. The expansion of spacetime was accelerating, driven by forces that would eventually tear apart the basic structure of reality itself. Stars would burn out, galaxies would be scattered across impossible distances, and intelligent life would face extinction not from war or disaster, but from the gradual dissolution of the physical laws that made existence possible. The architects had discovered ways to counteract these forces, to stabilize local regions of spacetime, and preserve the conditions necessary for intelligent life to continue. But the solutions required cooperation on a scale that no single species could achieve. They required the combined knowledge, resources, and capabilities of hundreds or thousands of different civilizations working together toward a common goal. The artifacts were more than repositories of knowledge. They were recruitment tools, designed to identify species that had reached the level of technological and social development necessary to contribute to the preservation of the universe itself. "We're being interviewed for the most important job in the universe," Doctor said, as the full scope of the architect's message became clear. "They've left behind the tools and knowledge necessary to save reality itself, but only if we can prove that we're capable of working together instead of destroying each other." As the survey pod began its return journey to the Endurance, carrying data that would keep scientists busy for centuries, found herself thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. The humans had gone from being dismissed as primitive to being recognized as the key to unlocking the greatest secrets in the universe. But more than that, they had forced all of galactic civilization to confront the fact that the universe was a far stranger and more dangerous place than anyone had imagined. The comfortable assumption that galactic civilization had reached the pinnacle of development, that there were no more great discoveries to be made or challenges to be overcome, had been shattered completely. Instead, they were apparently just at the beginning of a journey that would determine whether intelligent life could survive the ultimate challenges that the universe had to offer. And at the center of it all were the humans, the species that everyone had laughed at for evolving under impossible conditions, who had turned out to be exactly what galactic civilization needed to face the impossible challenges ahead.